The Galactic Council was certain they knew every living species in the known universe. They were ancient, powerful, and had seen countless worlds rise and fall. Empires collapsed, weak planets vanished, and through it all, the Council watched, judged, and recorded. Earth, in their grand and sweeping view, was one of the weak ones, a messy little planet filled with strange, primitive creatures. Humans, they noted, were chaotic. They fought amongst themselves over land, beliefs, and fleeting power. They possessed no natural weapons, no claws, no built-in armor, no special abilities. They were, in the Council's unanimous opinion, hopelessly primitive. So, when the time came for the invasion vote, it was a simple affair. Inside a vast, floating chamber of light and polished metal, high above the galaxy, the decision was made without fuss. There was no long debate, no flicker of fear. Earth will fall in a matter of hours, one council member stated calmly, as if discussing the weather. Another simply nodded. A short invasion, a lesson in galactic order. The vote passed without opposition. Far, far away, Earth carried on with its day, oblivious. People commuted to work, children filed into schools, and cities hummed with the noisy, vibrant pulse of life. No one thought to look up at the sky. And then, in a single, silent moment, everything changed. Across the globe, satellites winked out. Communication signals vanished into thin air. The internet, the lifeblood of the modern world, died in a flash. Power grids failed, plunging entire continents into darkness and an eerie, unfamiliar silence. In the void of space, the invaders appeared. Massive, shadowy warships materialized from nowhere, filling Earth's orbit like a swarm of dark omens. Their hulls were so black they seemed to drink the light of the stars. A low, menacing hum emanated from their weapon systems, a soft promise of the annihilation to come. The alien commanders waited. They had run this simulation 1,000 times. They expected panic, screams, chaos, and a swift, begging surrender. But Earth gave them nothing. No frantic messages, no desperate counterattacks, not even a plea for mercy, just a silence. On the Council's observation screens, the members watched, their curiosity piqued. One of them let out a quiet, condescending laugh. "They're frozen in fear," he said, and others murmured in agreement. But the minutes ticked by, and the silence from the planet below only deepened. Then, something happened that wasn't in their simulations. Deep beneath Earth's surface, in hidden places the Council's scans had never detected, ancient systems roared to life. These were systems never shown to the public, funded in secrecy, and tested only in the deepest shadows. Humanity's leaders, it turned out, had learned a long time ago that they were not alone in the universe. Hidden bases awakened from their slumber. Ancient, forgotten bunkers creaked open. Long-dormant military codes were activated. Earth did not cry out for help. Earth prepared for war. The first alien ship fired a warning shot. A blinding lance of energy sliced through the atmosphere and slammed into the ocean, sending a colossal wave to swallow the nearby coast. The message was brutally clear. Surrender now. The aliens waited again, confident this display of power would break the planet's will. Still no answer. And then, a brilliant, impossibly thin line of light erupted from Earth's surface. It moved faster than any kinetic or energy weapon the Council had ever catalogued. The beam struck one of the Vanguard warships. There was no explosion, no fire, no dramatic spectacle. The ship simply stopped. Its lights died. Its engines went silent. It became a dead husk, drifting lifelessly in orbit. The Council chamber, once so full of confident chatter, fell utterly quiet. Before anyone could process what they had just seen, a second beam fired, then a third. In less than 10 seconds, 3 of their state-of-the-art warships were disabled, turned into floating tombs. Alarms shrieked across the invasion fleet's command bridge. "That's impossible," an alien commander yelled, his voice cracking. "Human weapons are not supposed to be capable of this." Down on Earth, in fortified underground control rooms, human commanders watched the tactical displays with grim resolve. There were no cheers, no smiles of victory. This was not a celebration. This was merely the opening move in a fight for survival. The alien fleet, shocked but not broken, reacted with brutal efficiency. Swarms of fighters launched from massive carriers. A storm of missiles streaked toward the planet. A torrent of energy blasts rained down, aimed at turning Earth's surface into a molten wasteland. But humans were ready. Planetary defense systems, a patchwork of old technology and radical new theories, flickered to life. Missiles vanished in midair, intercepted by unseen forces. Glimmering energy shields materialized over major cities, deflecting the worst of the bombardment. Humans didn't try to overpower the invaders with brute force. They were trying to outlast them. And humanity had always been exceptionally good at surviving. Inside the Galactic Council chamber, confidence was rapidly giving way to a dawning panic. Members were speaking over one another, their voices rising in alarm. How did they hide this technology? They shouldn't have orbital-class weaponry. This was a grave mistake. Only one council elder remained silent, his many eyes fixed on the screens. He finally spoke, his voice slow and heavy with a newfound dread. These humans, they are not reacting like prey. The invasion entered its next phase. Alien dropships, burning like fallen stars, plunged through the atmosphere. They targeted the largest cities, expecting to find shattered infrastructure and terrified civilians, ripe for a swift takeover. Instead, they landed in streets that were unnervingly empty. The cities were dark. Too dark. Human soldiers were waiting. In the shadows, in the alleyways, on the rooftops. They used no lights, no radio signals. They knew their world. They knew every street, every building, every dark corner that could hide a threat or an ambush. The first alien patrol stepped out, their advanced armor gleaming, their weapons held at the ready. They moved with the arrogance of conquerors. Then the ground beneath them erupted. Hidden mines, preset traps, and remotely detonated explosives tore through their ranks. Gunfire erupted from unseen positions, hitting hard and fast. Before the human soldiers melted back into the shadows, the aliens fired wildly into the darkness. But they were shooting at ghosts. Every step forward was paid for in blood. From the safety of orbit, the council watched the ground footage with growing horror. "These are not civilians," one member whispered, his voice trembling. "They are soldiers. All of them." The human forces moved with a cold, terrifying discipline. They didn't scream in rage or fear. They didn't make reckless charges. Even when injured, they would drag their comrades to safety and keep fighting. When one squad was wiped out, another seamlessly took its place. When a building collapsed, they fought from within the ruins. Pain only slowed them. Loss only hardened their resolve. And fear, the council was beginning to understand, only made them sharper. The alien commanders, both on the ground and in orbit, realized their catastrophic error far too late. Earth wasn't unprepared. Earth had been waiting. The old council elder spoke again, his voice echoing in the now silent chamber. "We did not invade a weak world," he said, his gaze fixed on the image of a human soldier pulling a wounded comrade from the fire. "We invaded a world of survivors." As Earth burned under the relentless alien assault, and as human resistance grew stronger and more ferocious with every passing hour, a single, terrifying truth began to ripple across the galaxy. This war would not be over in hours. It would not be easy. And for the first time in centuries, the all-powerful Galactic Council felt a cold, unfamiliar emotion they had long since forgotten. They felt fear. The alien commanders expected a swift victory. In every past campaign, across 100 worlds, the pattern was the same. The initial shock handoff strikes would shatter a planet's defenses. Fear would grip the populace. Governments would collapse. Armies would scatter. And a plea for mercy would soon follow. Earth did none of these things. Instead, with every passing hour, human resistance grew fiercer. Alien ground forces advanced cautiously through the skeletal remains of human cities. Their sophisticated scanners painted a picture of emptiness. Abandoned streets, silent buildings, fractured roads. No civilians huddled in fear. No formal armies lined up for a glorious, futile last stand. The silence was heavy, unnatural. It felt wrong. It felt like a trap. Because it was. Human cities had been transformed into elaborate killing fields. As a platoon of alien soldiers moved down a wide avenue, the very ground beneath them gave way, plunging them into a deep, camouflaged pit lined with sharpened steel. Walls of seemingly intact buildings suddenly exploded outward, revealing human fighters who unleashed a single, devastating volley of fire before melting back into the shadows. Smoke, thick and acrid, billowed through the streets, jamming scanners and disrupting targeting systems. Alien communication networks, paragons of galactic engineering, failed again and again, isolating units and sowing confusion. The invaders were fighting ghosts. "Where is their command center?" an exasperated alien officer demanded over a flickering comm channel. The question echoed across the landing zones, but no clear answer came back. The humans weren't fighting like any species they had ever encountered. There was no single, identifiable leader to assassinate, no central control hub to obliterate. Each human fire team, each squad, seemed to operate with its own initiative, a decentralized, thinking organism. Yet, they all moved with a single, unified purpose, survive, delay, and strike back, hard, deep beneath a mountain range. In a bunker shielded by miles of solid rock, human commanders watched the invasion unfold on a constellation of screens. Their faces were etched with exhaustion, but illuminated by an intense focus. Maps glowed with enemy movements, damage reports, and casualty estimates. One officer, watching a successful ambush play out, spoke in a low, steady voice. Phase 1 is working. Another officer, tracking the enemy's confused response, nodded grimly. They still think this is a conventional war. Humans had learned a bitter lesson long ago, etched into their very DNA through millennia of conflict. War is never fair. They knew, with a certainty born of history, that stronger, more advanced enemies likely existed somewhere in the vast, dark expanse of the universe. So they didn't plan for a quick victory. They planned to make any invasion so costly, so painful, so utterly demoralizing, that the price of conquest would be too high to pay. The invaders attempted to secure a major coastal city, believing a massive, overwhelming show of force would finally break the human spirit. Drop ships filled the sky, their engines screaming as they descended, unleashing fire and noise. This time, they came prepared. Shields were active, weapons were hot, and every soldier was on high alert. They stepped out onto the streets, braced for the fight, and found nothing. The city was a tomb. Then, the buildings came alive. Windows on the 30th floor of a skyscraper shattered as human snipers, using simple projectile weapons, fired from impossible angles, their bullets finding the small gaps in alien armor. Swarms of small, agile drones burst from hidden sewer tunnels, kamikaze style, slamming into alien walkers and disabling their joints. Explosives, planted weeks ago, detonated beneath armored vehicles, flipping the multi-ton behemoths like children's toys. The aliens returned fire with their superior energy weapons, unleashing waves of plasma that turned entire buildings into molten slag. But the humans were fluid. They were like water, flowing through the cracks of their own ruined world. By the time an alien weapon locked onto a sniper's nest, the sniper was already gone, moving through a network of hidden passages to a new position 3 blocks away. The aliens advanced, but it was a slow, bloody crawl, measured in meters gained and soldiers lost. Their weapons were stronger, their armor was tougher, but the humans were proving to be infinitely more clever. Above the planet, the mighty invasion fleet was facing its own nightmare. Supply ships, making the long journey from orbital depots to the surface, were simply vanishing. Long-range sensors flickered with ghosts and false readings. Navigation systems, designed to be foolproof, were being fed corrupted data, sending ships on wild goose chases. Small, fast human ships, little more than refitted cargo haulers and mining vessels, would appear from nowhere, strike at a fleet's vulnerable supply lines or communication arrays, and then vanish back into the planet's dense atmosphere or the chaos of its orbital debris field. They didn't fight with honor. They didn't engage in grand fleet battles. They fought to win, by any means necessary. In a sterile chamber light years away, the Galactic Council watched the incoming reports with a mixture of disbelief and alarm. Ground losses were catastrophic, far exceeding even the worst-case projections. Orbital control, which should have been absolute within the first day, remained unstable and contested. Most disturbingly, human resistance showed no sign of collapsing. It was growing. "This makes no sense," one council member blustered, his voice echoing in the grand hall. "By all metrics, their societal structure should have fractured by now. They are doing the opposite," another replied, her gaze fixed on a display showing the relentless, coordinated human counterattacks. "They are adapting. They are hardening." A junior analyst, trembling slightly, dared to speak. "Counselors, I have been reviewing their species history. It is extensive. Humans have a long, brutal, and continuous history of war with themselves." The chamber fell silent. War with themselves. The thought was deeply unsettling. Species that survived constant internal conflict were exceedingly rare. They were evolutionary anomalies, and they were profoundly dangerous. On Earth, the invasion entered its most brutal phase. Frustrated and enraged, the alien commanders authorized heavy, indiscriminate orbital bombardment. Entire city blocks were erased from the map in flashes of white-hot energy. Ancient forests burned, and oceans boiled under the focused beams of the fleet's main cannons. The human death toll climbed into the millions. Still, they did not surrender. Human soldiers fought from the rubble of their homes, in flooded subway tunnels, and across scorched fields. They used simple weapons, clever traps, and a level of unbreakable teamwork that defied all alien psychological models. Wounded fighters refused evacuation, patching themselves up and returning to the line. Civilians became the lifeblood of the war, a planet-wide logistics network moving supplies, relaying messages, and repairing equipment, often under direct fire. This was no longer just an army fighting an invader. It was a planet united in its defiance. Alien morale began to crack. Soldiers, huddled in their fortified positions, whispered amongst themselves. They had never faced an enemy like this. Beings who stared into the face of certain annihilation and simply refused to accept it. Beings who kept fighting when all hope was lost. One alien unit managed to capture a lone, wounded human soldier. His armor was shattered, his weapon lost, and he was bleeding from a dozen wounds. The alien officer leaned in close, his voice a low growl. "Your world is lost," he said. "Your cities are ash. Why do you still resist?" The human looked up, his eyes weary but unbroken. A faint smile touched his lips. "Because," he said softly, his voice a dry rasp, "we've lost before." He held the officer's gaze. "And we're still here." Moments later, a hidden charge within the soldier's armor detonated. A final act of defiance that tore the alien unit apart from the inside. Across the burning planet, similar scenes played out. Humans were turning their own losses, their own weakness, into a weapon. Back in orbit, the flagship of the invasion fleet received a new signal. It was human in origin, broadcast on an open channel. The voice was calm, steady, and devoid of fear or panic. It was just 3 short, simple sentences. "This is Earth. We are aware of your presence. You are not welcome." The Galactic Council chamber erupted into furious debate. "They are sending warnings now? They have the audacity to warn us?" One member shrieked. "They should be begging for their lives." The eldest council member, who had seen the rise and fall of empires, watched the message replay again and again. He raised a hand, silencing the chamber. "No," he said slowly, his ancient eyes filled with a dawning horror. "You misunderstand. This is not a warning." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "It is a promise." As Earth's skies burnt and its people refused to break, the invaders and their distant leaders finally began to understand the terrible truth. They had not invaded a primitive, helpless world. They had kicked open the door to a cage, awakening something ancient, something patient, and something that had learned to survive at all costs. They had awakened humanity, and for the invaders, the war was only just beginning. The Galactic Council chamber, a place once defined by confidence and pride, now echoed with fear. The invasion of Earth was failing. Reports flooded in, each worse than the last. Entire battalions had vanished into the concrete jungles of ruined cities. Supply lines, once thought impenetrable, were severed repeatedly. Advanced healing units, the pinnacle of our medical technology, were completely overwhelmed by the sheer number of wounded soldiers being ferried back to orbit. One council member, his voice trembling, finally said what everyone was thinking. "This shouldn't be possible. Their technology is centuries behind ours." Another, a wise elder from a distant system, answered quietly. "Their thinking is not to understand this impossible enemy." The council ordered a full historical scan of Earth, not just military records, but everything. Their culture, their stories, their art, their recorded behavior. We needed to know what forged this species, what made them refuse to break when any other race would have shattered. The findings were deeply disturbing. Earth's history wasn't a tapestry of peace and progress. It was a brutal, unending chronicle of war, disaster, and near extinction. Humans had fought each other for land, for power, for beliefs. They had endured plagues that wiped out continents, world wars that scorched the planet, and weapons of their own creation that brought them to the very brink of self-annihilation. Yet, every single time, they rebuilt. They didn't grow stronger in body, but in mind. The analysts realized a terrifying truth. Humans weren't just trained to fight one enemy. They were trained for loss itself. Down on the war-torn surface of Earth, the conflict entered a strange, unsettling new phase. Human forces began a tactical retreat from several major cities, seemingly ceding ground to our advancing troops. To our commanders, it looked like a sign of their breaking spirit, a clear victory. It was a fatal mistake. Once our battalions were deep inside the urban maze, the trap was sprung. Narrow streets became kill zones. Underground tunnels, once part of their infrastructure, became ambush points. Damaged buildings concealed an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere at once. The human resistance returned in waves, fast, violent, and utterly unpredictable. They weren't trying to hold ground, they were controlling it. In one city, our forces proudly secured a massive human factory. It was silent, and eerie, unnatural quiet. When our engineers activated the main power grid, hoping to use the facility for our own production, the entire structure collapsed inward. It had been designed to do so. The factory became a tomb for thousands of our soldiers. On their maps, the human commanders simply marked the location as neutralized and moved on. There was no celebration, no moment of triumph. They just kept planning. Deep underground, in a secure bunker shielded from our orbital scans, a group of human leaders gathered. Their uniforms were tattered, their faces etched with exhaustion, but their voices were firm and steady. "We can't stop them everywhere," one officer stated, a grim reality. "We don't need to," another replied, her eyes glinting in the dim light. "We only need to make them doubt." That was it. That was the core of their strategy, a weapon more potent than any plasma cannon we possessed. Doubt. Because doubt kills an army faster than any blade. In orbit, our command structure began to fracture. Commanders argued openly. Some demanded more firepower, calling for planetary bombardment. Others insisted on more ground troops. A small, fearful minority even began to suggest withdrawal. None of them wanted to admit the truth. They were afraid. Human attacks in space became surgical and precise. Small, fast ships slipped through our defensive screens, targeting fuel depots and communication relays. They never engaged in prolonged dogfights. They never chased glory. They simply sowed chaos and confusion, then vanished back into the void. Then came a new kind of report, one that sent a chill through the entire council. Widespread mental health breakdowns among our troops. Soldiers were refusing direct orders. Veterans were freezing mid-combat. The mere sound of human weaponry was enough to induce panic. The fear wasn't just on the battlefield. It was a contagion spreading through the fleet. One of our chief scientists, a brilliant mind who had studied hundreds of species, finally spoke the words no one dared to utter. "Humans use psychological warfare as a natural extension of their being," she said. "It is an intrinsic part of how they survive themselves." The elder council member, the one who had seen the truth in their thinking, closed his eyes slowly. A heavy sigh escaped his lips. "This is not an invasion," he whispered to the silent chamber. "This is a lesson." On the ground, a captured alien commander was brought before a human officer. He steeled himself for torture, for rage, for the vengeance he was sure would come. Instead, he was handed a canteen of water. The human officer spoke, his voice calm, devoid of hatred. "Why did you come here?" The commander hesitated, baffled. "We believed you were weak." The human nodded, as if expecting that answer. "Everyone does." The commander's confusion grew. "You could have shown your strength earlier. You could have prevented this." The human officer simply shook his head. "Then you wouldn't have come close enough." The commander said nothing more. The news of this strange, unnerving encounter spread quietly through the invasion fleet, a whisper campaign more effective than any propaganda. Humans were not the monsters we had imagined, and somehow, that made them far more terrifying. Back at the council, the analysts presented their final, chilling conclusion. Humans had no single doctrine of war, no fixed strategy. They adapted constantly, learning from every mistake, theirs and ours. They treated war not as a clash of wills, but as a complex problem to be solved, and they never, ever stopped solving it. We finally understood our greatest error. We had judged humanity by their periods of peace, seeing them as chaotic and disorganized. We should have judged them by their history of war. As Earth's resistance hardened and our control over the planet crumbled, the invasion reached its breaking point. Every hour cost us more ships, more soldiers, more resources. Every meter of ground gained was temporary, a fleeting illusion of progress. The humans weren't trying to win quickly. They were waiting for our exhaustion, waiting for our doubt, waiting for fear to do the work their weapons had started. The elder council member rose from his seat, his ancient form casting a long shadow across the chamber. His voice, now filled with a solemn gravity, carried to every corner. "Call an emergency session," he commanded. "This war has changed." Across the galaxy, from the highest echelons of military command to the governments of distant worlds, a new truth began to dawn. Earth was not just defending itself. Earth was teaching the galaxy a profound and painful lesson. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never, ever underestimate a species that has survived itself. The war for Earth changed without a sound. For days, maybe weeks, humanity had fought like a ghost in the machine. We'd strike, vanish, and slow the invasion inch by painful inch. The alien commanders, sitting in their sterile ships high above, saw this as desperation. They believed it was all we had left. They were wrong. Across the shattered continents, a new phase began. There were no grand announcements, no defiant speeches broadcast into the void. Just a quiet, synchronized shift. Human military units that had been in a constant state of retreat suddenly stopped. They dug in their heels, turned around, and faced the enemy. The alien troops advancing through the skeletons of our cities were the first to feel it. A flicker on their sensors, movement where there should have been only silence and rubble. Their communication lines, once clear, became choked with short, frantic bursts of human signals too fast, too complex to decode. And then, the attacks came. These weren't the desperate, defensive skirmishes they were used to. These were ambushes, calculated, vicious. Human soldiers, cloaked by the night, struck at the invaders' soft underbelly. They didn't hit the front lines, they hit the supply convoys. They obliterated fuel transports, detonated ammunition depots, and leveled medical centers. They weren't fighting the alien army, they were starving it. The effects were immediate and devastating. Alien war machines sputtered and died, their power cells drained, their advanced weaponry slowed to a crawl. Their high-tech armor failed, leaving them vulnerable. Wounded soldiers, far from help, were left to their fate. Confusion, like a virus, spread through their ranks. Beneath the waves of Earth's oceans, a similar story unfolded. Human submarines, silent specters of the deep, rose from the crushing darkness. They unleashed torpedoes and missiles at alien ships hovering too low over the water, striking from impossible angles that no one had anticipated. One by one, massive alien vessels, burning pyres against the sky, plunged into the sea. And then there was space. Above the planet, something even more dangerous began to brew. The human space forces, a ragtag fleet of smaller, faster ships, changed their tactics completely. They no longer fled after a quick strike. Instead, they would linger, just long enough to be seen, a taunting glimmer on alien sensors. Then, they would vanish. Alien pilots, arrogant and overconfident, took the bait every time. They gave chase, eager to crush the last remnants of human resistance. They flew straight into meticulously laid traps. Invisible mines detonated in the blackness of empty space. Human missiles, guided by a new and terrifying logic, followed predictable escape routes that were no longer escapes at all. The invaders lost ships without ever seeing who fired the shot. They were fighting shadows, and the shadows were winning. Up in the Galactic Council chamber, the mood shifted from detached panic to raw, visceral fear. They're targeting logistics, one member stammered, his voice trembling. They're not fighting the invasion, they are dismembering it. Another, a high-ranking general, slammed his fist on the table. This is not how a weaker species fights, he roared. Only the elder council member, a being ancient beyond measure, remained calm. He watched the frantic displays of data, his old eyes seeing a pattern the others missed. They are not weaker, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. They are experienced. He knew. He had seen the histories of 100 conquered worlds. None of them had ever fought like this. Back on Earth, human commanders watched the battlefield unfold on their own screens. Every strike was measured. Every risk was calculated. This wasn't a war of annihilation. It was a war of attrition. We don't need to destroy them, one commander said quietly to her staff. We just need them tired. We need them scared. To that end, human forces even allowed some alien victories. Small ones, carefully controlled ones. Just enough to keep the enemy moving forward, to lure them deeper into the web. Alien commanders, desperate for a win, tried to respond. They ordered massive troop redeployments, pulling forces from occupied cities to protect their crumbling supply lines. It was a fatal error. The moment alien troops left, the cities they thought they'd conquered erupted in renewed defiance. The urban resistance surged back to life. Traps were reset. Communication towers, once seized, were toppled. The entire battlefield became unstable, a chaotic mess of fronts that shifted by the hour. And then came the moment that sealed their fate. A massive alien command ship, a symbol of their power, moved into low orbit to try and reassert control. It was the flagship, heavily shielded, bristling with weapons, and filled with their most senior officers and advanced command systems. Human sensors, from a dozen hidden sites, locked onto it. Deep beneath a desolate desert, a silo that had been sealed for decades groaned open. It was a relic, a launch system from a forgotten era, never meant to be used like this. For a moment, human commanders hesitated, the weight of their decision pressing down on them. Then, the order was given. A single weapon fired. It wasn't fast. It wasn't bright. It was just a steady, unassuming projectile arcing slowly through the atmosphere. Alien defense systems ignored it, flagging it as debris or a malfunctioning satellite. It was harmless, until it wasn't. When the projectile reached the command ship, it activated. The ship didn't explode in a blaze of glory. It just went dark. Every system shut down at once. Power, shields, weapons, life support. The colossal vessel, once a titan of the stars, was now just a dead piece of metal, drifting helplessly above the world it had tried to break. Human ships emerged from the darkness and surrounded it. They didn't fire. They didn't need to. Instead, they broadcast a message across all frequencies, a message heard by every alien soldier, on every ship, on the ground. This ship is disabled. A pause. We can do this again. Silence. The word was more powerful than any weapon. The alien fleets pulled back in shock. On the ground, their troops stopped dead in their tracks. Some simply froze, unsure of what to do. Others began retreating without orders. The idea that humans could simply turn off their most advanced technology with such surgical precision was a terror they had never conceived of. Inside the council chamber, the silence was absolute. Finally, one member whispered, the words barely audible. They could have done this from the beginning. The elder nodded slowly. Yes, he replied, and they chose not to. The meaning hung in the air, heavy and cold. Humans were holding back, not because they were weak, but because they were patient, because they were strategic. Down on Earth, human civilians felt the change. The constant airstrikes slowed to a trickle. The terrifying bombardments weakened, and with that small reprieve, hope, that most stubborn of human traits, returned. The sounds of resistance grew louder, more confident. Human leaders sent one last message into space. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a demand for surrender. It was a simple, chilling statement of fact. We are no longer defending. We are deciding. The Galactic Council finally understood the true danger they faced. A species that knew how to suffer and endure was one thing, but a species that chose when and how to strike, a species that could weaponize its own pain and patience, that was something else entirely. Across the galaxy, distant worlds that had watched Earth as plight with morbid curiosity now watched in stunned silence as the galaxy's most powerful invasion force collapsed into chaos and disorder. For the first time in their long, recorded history, the Council faced a truth they could no longer deny. They were no longer in control of this war. Humans were. The Galactic Council chamber had always been a place of control, a sanctuary of order. Every wall glowed with a calm, steady light. Every seat was meticulously shaped to remind its occupant of power, of the unshakable structure of their dominion. But now, that light felt cold, almost clinical. Council members arrived in a heavy silence, a stark contrast to their usual boisterous rivals. There were no proud speeches today, no confident plans being declared. The invasion of Earth, once seen as a simple matter of enforcement, had become something none of them wanted to admit. A failure. Massive screens filled the chamber, broadcasting live feeds from the war zone. The images were grim. Alien ships, once symbols of invincibility, drifted without power in the dark void around Earth. Ground forces, the elite of the Council's military, were shown retreating through ruined cities they had so easily conquered weeks ago. Supply fleets, the lifeblood of the invasion, were running low and unprotected. Easy targets for an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. One council member, his voice strained, finally broke the silence. We are losing. The word hung in the air, a forbidden truth finally spoken aloud. Another member, his pride wounded, snapped back. We are not losing. We are reassessing our strategy. A third replied quietly, his voice laced with dread. Reassessing does not explain the panic I see in these reports. And the reports kept coming, each one worse than the last. Desertions were on the rise. Commanders were refusing direct orders. Entire units were sending desperate requests for immediate evacuation. Fear, it turned out, had spread faster than any of their advanced weapons. It was a virus infecting their ranks, transmitted not by human weapons, but by human resolve. The elder council member, a figure of immense respect, stood slowly. His movements were deliberate, his face a mask of weary wisdom. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but carried the weight of galaxies. This war is no longer about Earth, he said, his gaze sweeping across the anxious faces. It is about us. Some members looked confused by this statement. Others, the more astute, understood at once. Across the galaxy, countless eyes were watching. Neutral worlds who had long respected the Council's power, rival empires who had long envied it, trade alliances whose fortunes were tied to the Council's stability. They had all believed the Council was an unstoppable force, an immovable object in the cosmos. Now they were watching that force hesitate. And in the ruthless politics of the galaxy, hesitation was a weakness, an invitation for predators. Meanwhile, human activity around Earth continued to grow more controlled, more confident. They weren't chasing the fleeing ships. They didn't launch reckless, vengeful attacks. They simply held their space, consolidating their position. Human patrols began appearing where they wanted, when they wanted. Human communication signals started replacing the Council's encrypted channels in case sectors of their own system. The message was clear, delivered without a single word. Earth was no longer a target. It was a fortress. On one distant battlefield, a desperate alien commander, driven by a need to regain lost honor, ordered a final, decisive push. His troops advanced through a half-destroyed city, expecting a bloody, chaotic fight. But the human resistance waited, not in anger, not in fear. They waited in silence. When the alien attack finally came, the response was not a battle, it was a dissection. It was precise, overwhelming, and terrifyingly efficient. Human units struck from above, from below, from within the very ruins the attackers were using for cover. The alien force, so proud and so disciplined, collapsed in a matter of minutes. The survivors surrendered, expecting the worst. But the human soldiers simply accepted their surrender. They didn't execute prisoners. They didn't cheer or celebrate their victory. This behavior confused the galactic observers more than any act of violence ever could. Why spare an enemy who had invaded your home? Why show such restraint? The answer began to spread slowly through the intelligence networks of a dozen empires. The humans weren't trying to scare the soldiers. They were trying to scare the Council. They were demonstrating a level of discipline and strategic thinking that went far beyond mere survival. Back inside the Council chamber, analysts presented a new projection, a stark, brutal forecast. If the war continued, the invasion fleet would suffer losses no empire could hide, no propaganda could spin. The economic and military recovery would take decades, maybe even a century. Worse still, Earth's methods were being studied by others. Human tactics, once dismissed as primitive, were now the subject of intense analysis in military academies across the galaxy. The seeds of a new kind of warfare were spreading. One council member spoke, his voice trembling with panic. "If we retreat, we will look weak. Our enemies will pounce," the elder answered, his voice steady as a rock. "If we stay, we may not leave at all." The room fell silent again, the weight of his words pressing down on them all. Just then, a new transmission arrived. It cut through every channel, bypassing all security protocols. It was not a demand. It was not a threat. It was an invitation. The signal carried a simple, clear message, translated instantly into every known language in the Council's archives. "This conflict can end. We will not chase you beyond our system. But we will remember." Many of the Council members felt a cold chill run down their spines. The humans were offering peace but on their terms. This was unheard of. The defeated were supposed to beg for mercy. Here, the defenders were the ones dictating when and how the war would end. Arguments erupted across the chamber, a cacophony of fear and fury. "They will grow stronger. We'll create a new rival. They will remember this betrayal and seek revenge. We should gather our full strength and erase them from existence now. While we still can." The elder raised his hand, and the chamber quieted. "Listen to yourselves," he said, his voice filled with a profound sadness. "You are screaming in fear of a species because they had the audacity to defend their home." He let that sink in, then added, "Imagine what they would become if we forced them to truly hate us." That single thought ended the debate more effectively than any argument. The fear of what a vengeful, unified humanity could become was more terrifying than the shame of retreat. The Council ordered a controlled withdrawal. Officially, it was called a strategic redeployment to secure core assets. Everyone in the galaxy knew the truth. The invasion had failed. As the great alien ships pulled back from Earth's orbit, human forces did not pursue. They watched. They recorded. They learned. On the planet's surface, Earth's skies slowly cleared of alien metal. Cities were scarred and burned, but they stood. Human soldiers returned not as conquerors, but as rebuilders, helping civilians, restoring power lines, clearing debris. The world had been changed forever, but it was not broken. Across the galaxy, news spread faster than light. Earth had survived. Earth had resisted. Earth had forced the mighty Galactic Council to retreat. Military academies began rewriting their entire doctrines. Analysts studied human history, our history, with a newfound and profound respect. Diplomats began to speak the word Earth with a caution once reserved for ancient, powerful empires. The Galactic Council released a final, terse statement. Earth and its solar system were to be designated a protected zone, a quarantine. No military action without unanimous council approval. No weapons testing. No more lesson wars. For the first time in galactic history, a single, isolated planet had changed galactic policy through sheer force of will. The Elder Council member watched the chamber empty out, member by member, until he was alone. He felt older than he ever had before. They thought humans were weak. He whispered to the empty room. They were so wrong. As the last alien ship vanished from Earth's orbit, human commanders around the globe shared no celebrations. There were no victory parades. They knew something important. They understood the gravity of what had just happened. This was not the end. This was the beginning, and the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The war for Earth ended not with a bang, but with a whisper. The last alien ship slipped away from the edge of our solar system, its engines dark, its weapons cold. We didn't chase them. We didn't launch a final, glorious attack. We just watched them go. And then, there was silence. A silence that felt heavier than any explosion. Down here, on the surface, the scars were deep. Our cities were shattered skeletons against the sky. Our forests were fields of ash. The oceans themselves bore the wounds of battle. But we were still here. Humanity was still standing. Through the ruins, our soldiers moved, not as conquerors, but as healers. They pulled survivors from the rubble, restrung power lines, and carved paths through twisted steel and broken stone. And right beside them, civilians joined in. There were no victory parades, no triumphant speeches, just the quiet, steady hum of work. This was how we began to heal, deep beneath the ground, in the same command centers that had orchestrated our desperate defense. Our leaders looked not to the past, but to the future. They knew the galaxy was watching. Every move we made now mattered more than any single battle we had won. So they chose something unexpected. They chose restraint. Across the stars, the Galactic Council published its final report on the invasion of Earth. It was a long, carefully worded document, wrapped in diplomatic language designed to hide one simple, powerful emotion: fear. The report called us unpredictably adaptive, relentlessly persistent, and strategically unparalleled. It warned that our culture forged soldiers who could absorb devastating losses without breaking, and commanders who could wait for the perfect moment without ever losing their nerve. But one line, buried deep within the analysis, sent a chill through every star system that read it. It said, "Humanity does not seek domination, but when threatened, it becomes an unstoppable force." Suddenly, Earth was no longer a backwater planet. We became a case study. Military academies across the galaxy added our history to their core curriculum. Cadets studied our quiet, layered defense systems, our patient, attritional tactics, and our baffling ability to turn suffering into fuel. A new, unspoken rule began to ripple through the cosmos. Do not provoke Earth. Invitations started arriving. We were asked to join councils that had once dismissed us. Trade offers, far more generous than before, filled our inboxes. Messages of peace and mutual respect followed. We accepted them, but slowly, cautiously. We didn't forget what had happened. We couldn't. Back on Earth, we built monuments, not to glorify war, but to remember its cost. They weren't statues of generals, but walls etched with names. The names of cities that were gone. The names of soldiers who never came home. The names of ordinary people who stood their ground when the sky itself was on fire. Our children learned the story in simple, honest terms. We were attacked. We survived. And we chose what came next. The years rolled on. Earth rebuilt. But not in the way anyone expected. We became stronger, but not louder. Our defenses remained mostly hidden, our fleets small but lethally efficient. We returned to what we had always loved: exploration, science, art. But we never, ever stopped watching the stars. In the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, the elder member who had once warned against the invasion stood to give his final address before retirement. He looked at the empty seat that had once been occupied by the arrogant ambassador of the invading force. His voice was quiet, but it filled the hall. "We believed strength was shown through conquest," he said. "The humans showed us that true strength lies in control of oneself. This time, no one argued out on the fringes. Beyond the core worlds, whispers became legends, stories of human ships that appeared without warning and vanished without a trace. Stories of soldiers who refused to surrender even when all hope was lost, and civilians who fought right beside them. Some tales were exaggerated, of course, but some were not. And in the end, it was the belief that mattered. Humanity had become a symbol, not just of fear, but of consequence, of a line that should not be crossed, one distant, powerful empire even considered trying their luck. Their war planners spent years analyzing the data from the failed invasion. They studied our tactics, our technology, our psychology. In the end, they quietly chose a different target. The potential reward of conquering Earth was no longer worth the absolute certainty of the risk. Back on our homeworld, a human commander stood on a hill, overlooking a city that had risen from its own ashes. A million lights twinkled where only rubble had stood. Life, vibrant and noisy, had returned. A young officer stood beside him, watching the peaceful scene. "Sir," she asked, "do you think they'll ever come back?" The commander was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the city below, then on the stars above. "Maybe," he said softly, "but not like before." "Why not?" the officer asked. The commander turned to her, a faint smile on his lips. "Because now," he said, "they know who we are." Above them, the stars shone with a calm, indifferent beauty. We hadn't claimed the galaxy. We hadn't conquered a single world. We hadn't needed to. The galaxy had simply learned to leave us alone. And somewhere, in the cold, silent records of the cosmos, a simple truth was etched for all time. Earth was not weak, Earth was patient, Earth was human. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more content like this. We'll see you in the next one.